HOA tried to turn my family's chapel into a memorial for someone I've never met, and they threw my mom's ashes in the trash to do it. And I didn't find out until I got back from a 4-day trip and noticed the roof was gone. Not damaged, not caved in, gone. Neatly removed, like someone had decided to convert my family's private chapel into a goddamn open-air gazebo. I didn't even drop my bag, just stood there in the driveway, keys in one hand, staring at this gaping hole where the cedar roof and carved dome used to be. The dome was the important part. My great-grandfather carved it by hand in 1892, full of oak leaves and pine cones and our family name, Varela, right across the front. Now there was just sky, no shingles, no copper ridge, no lettering. Just 4 beams where 100 years of legacy used to sit. I walked up slowly. The front doors were off the hinges and stacked on the grass like they'd been politely evicted. Inside was worse. The whole west wall had been stripped of its original paneling. My restoration plans were gone, the ones I'd mounted on the easel last week. A stack of white pamphlets sat on the window ledge in their place like some smug little welcome gift. Coming soon, the Joshua Langston Memorial Peace Garden, a project by the Audrey Langston Foundation, in partnership with the Pine Grove HOA Peace Garden. I sat down on the steps, or tried to. One of them was missing, so I kinda collapsed. I wasn't crying, I wasn't yelling. My brain had just powered off. All I could think was, where the hell is the dome? And then, where the hell is the urn? My mother's ashes were buried inside the floor, under a loose board I'd kept nailed shut. No marker, no plaque, no gravestone. Just a small brass urn wrapped in the quilt she made when I was 12. It wasn't meant for display, it was meant to stay where it was. Quiet, dignified, out of sight. This whole chapel was supposed to be hers. And now it was being turned into some PR stunt for a dead kid I'd never heard of, by the same HOA that tried to fine me last year for excessive tree density. I inherited the property last spring after my mom passed. It was about 2 acres tucked behind the Pine Grove subdivision, a thin, forested strip that technically didn't belong to their HOA. They hated that, especially Audrey Langston, their little tyrant of a vice president. The chapel stood right in the middle of it. Old clapboard walls, hand-cut beams, rusted weather vane, the kind of place that gets its own postcard if it's still standing in Vermont. My great-grandfather built it after immigrating from Galicia, back when nobody in this country could even pronounce our name. It never served as an actual church, just a place to gather, a space for weddings, stories, journaling, grieving. I used to sit there with my mom on Sundays, no service, no sermons, just silence. She'd light a candle for her sister, then show me how to mend wood without splitting it. One time, when I was 16 and wrecked over some girl who ghosted me after prom, she made me write everything down in a notebook and read it aloud in that chapel. If it still hurts after you say it out loud, she told me, say it again tomorrow. That stuck with me, so when she died, I didn't scatter her ashes over the lake or bury them under a tree. I put them here, in the floor, in a chapel that held every version of her I ever knew. Not because she asked me to. She didn't. But because I knew damn well it's what she would have wanted. When the grant came through from the State Historical Society, I took a leave from work and started restoring it full-time. Carefully, properly. I documented everything. The original beams, the joinery, the type of whitewash they used in 1901. I even filed for private landmark status, which I thought would keep it safe. I was wrong, because somewhere between me pulling nails out of a floorboard and going to Raleigh for a grant renewal, Audrey Langston decided that my private chapel was now a public restoration site for her fake-ass foundation, and she started ripping it apart like it belonged to her. And trust me, Audrey doesn't do anything that doesn't benefit Audrey. The first time Audrey overstepped, it didn't even register as an incident. It was just one of those passive-aggressive HOA things you think is petty until you realize it's a landmine. She showed up at my gate on a Sunday afternoon, holding a clipboard and smiling like she was about to offer me banana bread. I was trimming back some of the wild ivy near the chapel when I heard her call out, "Oh good, you're home." I should have pretended I wasn't. Instead, like an idiot, I waved. She let herself in without asking, all cheery and fake surprised. "Oh wow, it really is peaceful back here, isn't it?" "Just lovely. My son used to come down here when he was little, back when this was all just woods." That was a weird opener, considering the land's been ours since the 40s. She held up her clipboard like a cop about to issue a warning. "So listen, I just wanted to make you aware that the chapel structure technically qualifies as an unregistered religious building, and the HOA's compliance committee has some concerns about safety and code." I said, "Cool, that's great, I'm not in your HOA." She laughed, that tight little polite laugh people do when they've decided you're going to be a problem. "Right, yes, of course, it's just, Well, this neighborhood does fall under our historical beautification zone, so anything visible from community paths is subject to aesthetic review. Purely visual, nothing punitive. I looked around. There were no paths, no sidewalks, just trees, grass, and the gravel driveway my mom laid by hand. I said, "You mean the view your dog walkers get when they cut through my property?" That wiped the smile off her face for half a second. But Audrey doesn't do open hostility. She does paperwork. The next morning, I found a bright yellow envelope stuck under a rock on my porch. No stamp, no return address, just a printed notice inside. Property non-compliance alert. Structure. Incompatible with zone standards. The building known as Varela Chapel may be subject to mandatory review pending safety and zoning audit. Owner advised to remove or remodel out-of-character exterior elements, specifically cupola, wooden signage, chimney, and roof slope. Pine Grove HOA Committee for Memorial Aesthetic Review. That last part? Yeah, she just made that up. There is no Memorial Aesthetic Review Board. She literally invented a fake committee to sound more official. I crumpled the notice and tossed it in the compost bin. I should have seen it then. This wasn't just some overzealous HOA Karen nitpicking paint colors. This was a test run. She was poking to see if I'd push back. I didn't. I figured she'd get bored and move on. Spoiler, she didn't. About 2 weeks after the fake compliance notice, things got weirder. I'd been busy, driving back and forth to Raleigh for grant meetings, digging through records, documenting every beam in the chapel. So when I got home one night and saw the little orange flag staked along the edge of my property, I figured maybe the utility company had marked something. Nope. Next morning, there's a man in a neon vest measuring my front easement with one of those rolling tape wheels. I step out with coffee in hand and ask if he's from the city. He goes, "Oh no, ma'am, from the foundation hired us. We're surveying for the access path." Access path. I said, "What foundation?" He flipped through his little clipboard and said it like it was obvious. "The Audrey Langston Foundation." I laughed, out loud. I thought it was a mistake. I said, "You're on private property." He looked around, kinda shrugged, and said, "Yeah, she said you were donating this part for the public walkthrough." Then he pointed toward the chapel. "That's the garden center, right?" I don't remember walking back inside. I just remember standing in my kitchen a few minutes later, staring at my toaster, trying to wrap my head around the sentence, "donating this part." She was staging a full-on land grab. Later that afternoon, I went to the HOA's little clubhouse/office at the edge of the subdivision. They've got this absurd white pergola out front that makes it look like a wedding venue, and inside it's just Pottery Barn furniture and inspirational quotes in fake wood frames. Community is everything. Sure it is. Audrey wasn't there, but her assistant, some college kid who looked deeply underpaid, handed me a brochure. The Joshua Langston Memorial Peace Garden, a community healing project. Page 2 had a diagram, trails, benches, a bronze sculpture. Right in the middle, my chapel, relabeled as the Reflection Hall. There was a quote under it, supposedly from me. "It's an honor to offer this space to our neighbors in memory of someone who meant so much." I damn near choked. They fabricated a quote. They used my name. When I asked the kid where they got that, he panicked and said Audrey drafted the materials based on community feedback. So now I was giving public interviews I never gave, for a memorial I never agreed to, for a person I'd never even met, and it kept snowballing. A week later, I got a letter from the city about pending reassessment of usage classification. Turns out Audrey had filed a formal request to rezone part of my lot as public access commemorative space, with the justification that it was donated by verbal agreement. Verbal. What verbal agreement? I hadn't talked to this woman since she came on my land uninvited. Then came the real blow. I got a call from the State Historical Society. My grant, the one I'd already started using for materials, had been temporarily frozen because someone submitted conflicting usage claims about the site. Guess who? I went down there in person, furious, thinking I'd just show them my paperwork and they'd fix it. But bureaucracy doesn't care about logic. They said until it was resolved, they had to pause the funding. Couldn't be seen funding a religious restoration that's now potentially public use. I walked out of there feeling like I'd been robbed and told to say thank you. And then the thing that pushed it all over the edge happened. I got back late from a trip. It was a Thursday. When I pulled up the driveway, my headlights hit something that made my stomach turn. The chapel was open, lights on, doors wide, and people, actual people, inside. There were maybe 6 or 7 of them, all in matching blue shirts that said Peace Garden Crew. They had boxes of tiles, paint, some cheap landscaping bricks. One guy was standing on a ladder with a drill, and another had what looked like a carpet swatch in his hand. I stopped the truck and got out slowly. One of them smiled at me like I was the guest. "Hey, you must be Lennox," she said, like we were old friends. "We're just getting started in here. You're gonna love what we're doing with the place." I didn't answer. I was staring past her. The dome was gone. The whole roof was just open sky. And the floor, they'd ripped up the planks, the spot where my mom's urn was buried, covered in mulch bags and someone's goddamn yoga mat. I said, "Where's the urn?" Nobody answered. I walked inside, nearly shaking, and found it in a plastic storage bin with rags and a broken lantern. They didn't even know what it was. They'd just scooped it up with everything else and tossed it in a box like it was part of the trash. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even say a word. I picked up the bin, got in my truck, and drove away. The next morning, I came back with every tool I owned, nailed plywood over the doorframe, locked the gates, and posted 6 private property signs in English and Spanish. And I left one more thing by the chapel door, a copy of my mom's will, laminated with her name circled in red. At first, I thought I could fix it with paperwork. That's the curse of growing up in a halfway decent family. You think people will play fair if you just explain things clearly, show the facts, be reasonable. So I started with the city. I made an appointment with planning and zoning, walked in wearing actual slacks like some kind of idiot who still believed in decorum, and dropped a binder on the guy's desk. Deed history, survey maps, grant approvals, even a notarized letter from the Historical Society confirming my private ownership and intent. I said, "This is my property. That structure is privately owned, privately funded, and historically designated. This rezoning request is based on lies." The guy, Greg or Chad or whatever, just blinked at me and said, "Yeah, but the foundation submitted community letters of support, and technically they're not asking to rezone the house, just the area immediately surrounding it for easement purposes." I said, "The area surrounding it is the chapel." He nodded like that was a fun fact, not the entire problem. Then he leaned back and said, "Have you considered working with the foundation instead of against them? I mean, the community response has been really enthusiastic." And that's when I realized what this really was, a PR machine. Audrey had already written the story, everyone else was just reading it. But I wasn't done. Next, I went to the police, filed a report for trespassing, unauthorized construction, and destruction of property. Officer Patel, who was maybe 25 and looked terrified of confrontation, wrote everything down and promised they'd look into it. When I asked if that meant actual investigation or just moving the file into a folder labeled "Ugh," he smiled awkwardly and said, "We'll follow up." Spoiler, they didn't. I even went to the HOA board meeting. Yes, me, sitting in a folding chair under harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by people who literally applauded when Audrey walked in. I waited my turn, stood up, and told the room exactly what happened. How they'd entered my land without permission, removed parts of a historic structure, and thrown away my mother's ashes. You know what Audrey said? She smiled. Actually smiled and said, "There must have been a misunderstanding. No one intended to remove anything of value. We assumed the building was abandoned, and we did reach out, Lennox. You just weren't very responsive." I said, "Because I was restoring it. I had grant-funded work in progress." She gave that fake concerned nod like she was about to start a TED Talk. And we appreciate that. But the community has needs too. Healing spaces are so rare these days. Your property is perfectly situated for it. A guy in the back clapped. I turned to the board and said, "You're allowing this woman to exploit a dead child she barely talks about for publicity and donations." Silence. Then one of the board members, her best friend probably, leaned forward and said, "Let's keep this respectful, Mr. Varela. Audrey's foundation has helped so many grieving families. This isn't about politics. It's about healing." Healing. They vandalized my property, desecrated my mother's resting place, and now they were gaslighting me with words like healing. I realized right then, they didn't care about property rights, or ethics, or decency. They cared about optics. As long as Audrey was doing good, nobody wanted to look too closely at how she was doing it. But here's the part that really got me. After the meeting, this older couple came up to me in the parking lot. The woman, Marlene, I think, said she was sorry, said she remembered my mom, that she used to bring cookies to the chapel during the holidays. Her voice broke when she said it. Then her husband, quiet guy, Vietnam vet, pulled me aside and whispered, "We didn't know there were ashes inside. If we had, we never would have signed that petition. Audrey told everyone it was just an old tool shed." A tool shed. 100-year-old hand-carved chapel. My family's legacy, my mom's final resting place. reduced to a tool shed by a woman who wanted a garden with her son's name on it and didn't care who she bulldozed to get it. That's when it clicked for me. This wasn't going to get fixed with binders or building codes or respectful dialogue. Audrey didn't need me to agree, she just needed me to stay quiet. And that was never gonna happen. I wasn't even looking for a twist, I was just trying to find paperwork. After that HOA meeting disaster, I drove straight to my mom's old storage unit, the one up in Ashboro. She used to keep all the family documents there, tax stuff, letters from my grandfather, weird family photos, and nobody ever framed. It was hot as hell that day. The unit smelled like old cedar and melted crayons, and everything was shoved into mismatched Rubbermaids with masking tape labels in her handwriting. I dug through 6 bins before I found what I was looking for, a folder marked Land Transfer 1947. I'd seen it before, years ago, but never paid attention. This time, I read every page. Turns out, the chapel and the land it sat on weren't just some inherited property. It had been gifted by Audrey's father. Yeah, you heard that right. Back in '47, her dad, Leonard Langston, owned the surrounding acreage. He sold most of it off to developers, but 2 acres, the ones with the chapel, he personally deeded to my great-grandfather. I found the original letter that came with it, typed on thin paper, signed in blue ink, dated April 3rd, 1947. It said, "This land has always held peace for me. I hope it will for you and your family as well. Use it with dignity, and may it never belong to anyone who values vanity over quiet." That hit me hard. I sat there on the concrete floor holding that letter, thinking her own father wanted this land to stay in hands that respected it, not exploited it. And Audrey? She was turning it into a photo shoot for her fake healing foundation, slapping her dead kid's name on something her father meant for quiet. But that wasn't even the twist. The twist was this. In the same folder, tucked behind a stack of old land surveys, I found a recent document. It was a quitclaim deed, signed Delia Varela, my mom, dated 2 years after she died. At first I thought it was a mistake, wrong date or something. But no, the signature was shaky and wrong. It didn't have her looped D, it didn't have the slash she always did through her L. Hell, it looked like someone tried to draw her name from memory. It was a fake. The file had been quietly added, buried with the older records, and marked with a sticky note, "Filed copy HOA request." My throat went dry. She'd forged my mother's signature. Audrey Langston, or someone working with her, had created a document that made it look like my mom had willingly transferred the land to Pine Grove HOA for community stewardship. Which explained why the city, the grant office, even the police were dragging their feet. As far as they were concerned, it looked like I didn't own the land anymore. It was fraud. Full-on, criminal, calculated fraud, and she didn't even try that hard to hide it, because she didn't think she had to. She thought I'd back down, that I'd get overwhelmed, fold under the pressure, or, best case for her, leave town. She'd played this game before, just not with someone like me. Because here's the other thing I found in that storage unit, something I didn't even know existed. A photograph of Audrey and her son from one of those glossy charity gala spreads. She's holding a plaque. The caption, Audrey Langston, founder, the Joshua Langston Foundation. But what caught my eye was the date. It was from this year. I blinked, stared again, because last I checked, her son had died 3 years ago. So why was he in the photo? I grabbed my phone, pulled up the website for her foundation. It was all soft colors, angelic music, phrases like a mother's mission of healing. Half the page was a tribute to Joshua, taken too soon, may his memory be a blessing, etc. But then I clicked the board of directors page. There he was, Joshua Langston, director of outreach, alive, employed, probably watching TikToks while his mom used his memorial to grab property and guilt-trip donors. My brain short-circuited. She lied about the land. She lied about my mom, and she lied about her son being dead. I sat in that storage unit and laughed. The kind of laugh that only happens when you're 1 inch away from snapping and just need one more reason. She didn't just fake documents. She'd created an entire false tragedy to build a foundation, to elevate her image, to secure grant money, and now to steal property. All of it built on lies, and now I had proof. So yeah, I had a fake deed, a fake memorial, and a very much alive dead son staring back at me from a foundation website. At that point, I wasn't mad. I was methodical. I don't do explosions, I do pressure, and pressure applied in the right places cracks concrete. The first thing I did was make copies of everything. Scanned the forged quitclaim deed, the old letter from Audrey's dad, the land surveys, and the photo of her son grinning next to her at the gala. I backed it all up: cloud, USB drive, hard copy in a fireproof lockbox. If Audrey wanted a war, I wasn't going to show up with just feelings. Then I called a friend of mine from undergrad, Alicia. She works in nonprofit compliance now, somewhere in DC. She once shut down a fake dog rescue that was trafficking purebreds to rich people under the label of emotional support retraining. Long story. I sent her everything I had. She called me the next morning and said, "Oh my God, Lennox, this woman is a walking federal audit." She walked me through exactly how foundations get investigated, what agencies to report to, which forms to file, and what phrases make people actually read your complaint instead of filing it under angry citizen yelling at clouds. Then came phase 2. See, I knew going head-to-head with Audrey in court would take time, months, maybe years. But if I could break the illusion she built, the nice, benevolent, grieving mother giving back to the community, her house of cards would collapse on its own. So I went public, quietly. I started with the local veterans group, the same one her dad used to be a part of, the one that held their monthly meetings in the old rec hall near the lake. I showed up with a folder, some coffee, and the original letter from her father. I told them what she was doing to the chapel. I told them how she threw out my mom's ashes. Then I showed them the forged deed. They weren't loud about it, but you could feel the shift in the room. These were old guys, some of whom knew her growing up, and they didn't like the smell of this. Then I reached out to 3 other families I'd heard rumors about, people in the neighborhood who had voluntarily contributed land or money to Audrey's foundation. Turns out one of them, an elderly couple on the next street over, had signed something they didn't understand and nearly lost their backlot to a community meditation patio. They'd stayed quiet, embarrassed. I said, "Don't be, you're not alone." Then I built a website, nothing flashy, just facts, documents, scans, photos, a copy of the original chapel blueprint with the title, "What They Tried to Erase." And at the bottom, an open letter. This land is not just land, it's memory, it's promise, and I won't let it be turned into a trophy for someone else's ego. I didn't blast it everywhere, I just shared it with the people who mattered. Sent it to the State Historical Society, the city planner, the HOA board, even Audrey's own donors once I found the mailing list through her tax forms, which, by the way, were full of expenses that looked a lot like catered dinners and spa retreats. But the real chess move? I sent an anonymous tip, with documentation, to the IRS tax-exempt division. Let me tell you something, the IRS doesn't care about your drama, but they do care about fraudulent nonprofits using 501c3 status to buy landscaping stones and call it grief therapy. Especially when the foundation is collecting money in memory of a person who isn't dead. Oh, and I wasn't done. I emailed 2 local journalists, just small-town blogs, but the kind that love a juicy story with villains who wear pearl necklaces and give fake speeches about healing through art. Subject line, story tip, fake foundation, forged signature, family chapel, vandalized. Attached, everything. Then I sat back and waited. Not idle, though. While the storm brewed, I went back to the chapel, started repairing what I could, replaced the stolen floorboards, resanded the steps, set up a camera system, quiet, cheap, off-grid, just in case someone got bold again. And one more thing. I built a new sign, same wood as the original, hand-carved. Took me 3 nights. It didn't say Reflection Hall or Peace Garden. It said, Varela Chapel, established. 1892. This land was gifted, not stolen. This name was earned, not branded. I mounted it on a post, bolted it into concrete, and faced it directly toward Audrey Langston's house. From her kitchen window, it was the first thing she'd see every morning. Her smile was built on fiction. But my silence? That was real. Until now. So here's how it started to break. It wasn't one big explosion, it was little cracks, spreading quietly at first, then real fast once the weight got heavy enough. The first tremor hit on a Thursday morning. I woke up to 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize and a short voicemail from some guy named Ray Dobbins, senior editor at the Pine Grove Ledger, which granted sounds like a newspaper for raccoons, but they do have readers. His message was polite, but you could hear the adrenaline. Mr. Varela, we received an anonymous tip about your property and the Langston Foundation. Would love to talk. It's quite a story. I didn't call him back right away, I didn't need to, because by noon it was on the front page of their website. Foundation faces scrutiny over chapel takeover, alleged forged documents, and false memorial claims. It wasn't just well written, it was brutal. They laid out the whole thing, how Audrey Langston's foundation used zoning loopholes to claim private land, how the deed transfer was signed by a woman 2 years deceased, how her memorial garden was for a son who was very much alive and working for her foundation. And they had photos, the chapel before and after, the urn, the original deed from 1947, even a side-by-side of her son grinning next to the plaque that said, "In loving memory." The last paragraph killed me. It quoted the letter her father wrote to my great-grandfather. "May it never belong to anyone who values vanity over quiet." Right under that, they ran a photo of Audrey at some HOA event, smiling with her arms wide like she was hosting a damn TED Talk. It went viral, at least small-town viral. By Friday morning, it was picked up by 2 bigger local news stations. Channel 6 ran it with the headline, "Fake Foundation, Local HOA VP Accused of Land Theft, Document Forgery, and Memorial Fraud." That same day, the State Historical Society called me back. Different tone this time, real apologetic. Apparently, my grant was not only reinstated, but the board had launched their own internal review, because the Langston Foundation had applied for preservation grants using my chapel as a shared cultural asset. You read that right. She tried to get state money for restoring a building she didn't own, had no right to touch, and partially demolished. Then came the IRS knock. Not literal, just an email. Your 13,909 submission is under active review. That's the form for reporting nonprofit abuse. It's dry, boring, but once it's moving, it moves. A week later, I heard from Alicia again, my friend in compliance. She said 3 foundations in the state had been flagged for expedited audit, and guess who was on the list? Oh, and then came the fun part. The HOA tried to circle the wagons, issued this tight little statement about how Audrey had acted independently and misunderstood the limits of community oversight. But the board president? Yeah, he resigned. The treasurer? Admitted to rubber stamping certain purchases without full review, including $5,000 marked as spiritual foliage acquisitions. Still not sure what that even means. They tried to hold an emergency closed-door meeting to restructure community priorities. I showed up anyway. I didn't speak. I just sat in the front row, arms crossed, with a big foam core poster behind me, a blown-up version of the forged deed with deceased 2 years, before signature stamped across it in red. People took pictures. The next morning, Audrey stepped down. They called it a sabbatical. I call it what it was, retreat. Her son deleted his bio from the foundation website. Their Facebook page went dark. The donation portal vanished. But I wasn't done. I hosted a gathering at the chapel. Not a protest, not a speech, just an open afternoon. Come by, ask questions, see the space. I set up the urn where it belonged, in the center of the floor with fresh flowers. Hung the family photos back on the wall. Played my mom's favorite jazz vinyls through the old speaker she swore still sounded warmer than Bluetooth ever would. Neighbors came. Some were embarrassed. Some were angry. A few just quietly said, "I had no idea." One woman cried. Said she signed Audrey's petition because she was told the chapel was abandoned and full of raccoons. Yeah, raccoons. I just nodded. Didn't gloat, didn't shout, because I didn't need to. The truth had legs now. It was walking around town in other people's mouths. The real blow came at Pine Grove's Spring Community Showcase. It's this big annual thing they do, mostly for show. Bounce houses for the kids, tiny food trucks lined up like ducklings, a tent full of handmade soaps nobody buys, and of course a main stage where the HOA board gives speeches about progress and unity. Audrey was still officially on sabbatical, but her name was on the schedule. Closing remarks, 4 p.m., right after the middle school dance team and some guy with a guitar covering Ed Sheeran songs too slowly. So I made a few calls. Not to the media, they were already coming. Not to lawyers, they were already circling. I called a few of the other families Audrey had tried to steamroll. The couple with the backlot, the woman whose garden got reclassified as a pollinator project without her consent, the retired librarian whose fence was torn down because it didn't match HOA aesthetic continuity. I invited them to attend, and I told them, don't yell, don't argue, just show up. So we did. All of us spread out in the audience like calm, well-dressed landmines. I sat right in the second row with a folding chair I brought myself. On my lap, a binder, on my shirt, a button I made that morning, ask me about the fake dead son. She walked on stage at 3:59, beige heels, pastel dress, pearl earrings, of course. Her smile was mechanical, just enough wattage to project sincerity, not enough to show nerves. But you could see it in her eyes. She knew. She adjusted the mic and launched into the script. Thanked the community, mentioned new chapters and healing spaces, talked about how proud she was of Pine Grove for rallying around shared values. Then she said something that almost made me laugh out loud. Sometimes we inherit legacies we didn't ask for, but we carry them anyway, not because we must, but because we believe in something bigger than ourselves. That was it, her pivot. She was going to reframe everything, not as a scandal, but as a misunderstanding fueled by grief. A mother's imperfect but well-intentioned crusade. Until slide 6. Yeah, she had slides. Giant screen behind her with a slideshow. Photos of the garden project, smiling volunteers, blurry screenshots of heartfelt emails. Then, I don't know how it got there, I do, the screen glitched, and up popped a scanned image of the forged quitclaim deed. Signature, Delia Varela. Date, August 2023. Footnote in bold, Delia Varela passed away in March 2021. She froze. Whole crowd went quiet. The screen shifted again. New slide. A photo of Audrey and her son at the gala. Caption, Joshua Langston, Director of Outreach. Overlay, memorial garden named for son who is alive and employed. She tried to recover, clicked her clicker. Nothing happened. Somebody in the audience whistled low and slow. Then the murmuring started. Not shouting, just that ripple of realization moving through the crowd like a breeze right before a thunderstorm. She stepped back from the mic and whispered something to the AV kid. Poor guy looked like he wanted to fall through the earth. Then someone in the audience, Marlene, the old neighbor who used to bring cookies to my mom, stood up and asked, "Why did you throw out his mother's ashes?" Audrey flinched like she'd been slapped. Marlene didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Then a second person stood up, and a third. All calm. All asking questions. Did you forge that signature? Why did you say the chapel was abandoned? Why did you take money for a memorial that wasn't real? It wasn't a mob. It was worse. It was quiet accountability. That kind where nobody's yelling, they just see you now. Audrey looked at the crowd like she didn't recognize a single face. Then she turned, mic still hot, and snapped. "I was trying to do something beautiful. You people wouldn't understand." Dead silence. Someone from the HOA board rushed up, whispered something in her ear, and walked her off stage like a bad prom date. The rest of the event canceled. Vendors packed up. The band left. Even the soap tent disappeared. But the story? It was already spreading. Faster than a viral cat video. By that evening, every HOA group chat had screenshots. The news stations ran segments. One even used a drone shot of the chapel, overhead view, flowers around the steps, the new sign facing skyward like a middle finger carved from oak. And Audrey? She went completely dark. Deleted social media, no more statements, not even a press apology. Last I heard, she left town. Some say Florida, some say Arizona. Doesn't really matter. Because in Pine Grove, her name is toast. And the Varela Chapel? Now it's finally just what it always was. Ours. It's quieter now. Not in a dramatic way, just naturally quieter. The kind of quiet you earn. The kind that makes you stop mid-step when you hear a hawk screech overhead or the wind push through pine needles, and you don't rush it. You just stand there and let it be. The chapel's whole again. Took me most of the summer to get it there. Rebuilt the roof beam by beam, hand-sanded the floor, reinstalled the dome. I carved my mom's name into the back panel under the archway. Small, nothing flashy, just Delia Varela, Keeper of Light. Walter, one of the older guys from the veterans group, brought over a flag box he made himself. Said my mom used to help his wife with grocery runs back in the day. I didn't even know that. People started telling me things about her I'd never heard, like her legacy just kept unfolding, even after she was gone. A couple weeks ago, I hosted a little open house, not a public event, not some redemption tour, just chairs on the lawn, a table of lemonade, vinyl playing on the deck. Some of the same folks who once signed Audrey's petitions came. Nobody apologized with speeches. They didn't have to. They showed up, stayed long, and left their shoes at the door. That's all I needed. The chapel still isn't open to the public. Never will be. But if you know, you know. If you need a quiet place, if you're hurting and it's not performative, yeah, I'll unlock it. But no more fake foundations. No more weaponized grief. No more healing spaces that bulldoze real ones. I got a letter last week from the IRS. Case closed, corrective measures taken. Don't know if she got fined, suspended, or just scared enough to run. Doesn't really matter anymore. Her name's gone from every sign, website, directory. It's like she never touched this place, except we know better. And now, well, fall's setting in. Leaves are starting to curl. Air smells like ash and wood and something old pulling back into the soil for a rest. Last night I sat on the chapel steps with a cup of tea and watched the moon rise through the same stained glass window my great-grandfather installed with a chisel and prayer. No noise, no headlines, no audience, just the weight of it all settling in and not crushing me for once, just holding me. The sign still stands out front. Varela Chapel, established, 1892. This land was gifted, not stolen. And the funny thing, every so often someone passes by, reads it, and smiles like it's their own family's story too. That part, that feels right. That feels like peace. Real peace, the kind you don't need a plaque for.